Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, July 21st, 2022. President Joe Biden tests positive for COVID-19. His doctor says the president is experiencing very mild symptoms and will isolate at the White House and has started taking the antiviral drug Paxlovid. President Biden posting a video saying he is doing well and getting work done. The House January 6th committee holding its final scheduled hearing tonight. The topic, what former President Donald Trump was doing while the rioters were attacking the U.S. Capitol that day in 2021 during the counting of electoral votes that showed that Joe Biden had won the presidential election. We will get a preview of the hearing with a Washington Post reporter. U.S. House passing a bill to guarantee access to contraception, the latest in a series of bills that House Democrats have brought up after the Supreme Court decision to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision on abortion and concerns that other rights based on the same privacy reasoning may be reversed in future cases. In the U.S. Senate, more work on a bill to provide over $50 billion in aid for the U.S. computer chip industry. We'll talk about that with a reporter at CQ Roll Call. And the TSA Administrator David Bukowski has a Senate confirmation hearing, getting questions about airport screening wait times and also the acceptance of certain documents by illegal immigrants as valid forms of ID, such as arrest warrants. A statement from the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre this morning begins. This morning, President Biden tested positive for COVID-19. He is fully vaccinated and twice boosted and experiencing very mild symptoms. He has begun taking Paxlovid. Consistent with CDC guidelines, he will isolate at the White House and will continue to carry out all of his duties fully during that time. Another statement from the president's physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, says the president is experiencing runny nose, fatigue, and an occasional dry cough, which started yesterday evening. And also, the president is fully vaccinated and twice boosted, so I anticipate that he will respond favorably as most maximally protected patients do. Early use of Paxlovid in this case provides additional protection against severe disease. Paxlovid is recommended for those at high risk of severe COVID. That includes anyone over 50. President Biden is 79 years old, also those with some underlying health issues. White House says the isolation will be 5 days, and the president will resume normal activity after a negative test. President Biden himself posting this video from a White House balcony.
Hey folks, guess you heard this morning I tested positive for COVID, but I've been double vaccinated, double boosted, symptoms are mild, and I really appreciate your inquiries and your concerns. But I'm doing well, I'm getting a lot of work done, I'm going to continue to get it done, and in the meantime, thanks for your concern, and keep the faith, it's going to be okay.
President Biden putting that video on Twitter. He also had to cancel a scheduled trip today to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he tweeted a photo of himself at his desk with this caption, "Folks, I'm doing great. Thanks for your concern. Just called Senator Casey, Congressman Cartwright, and Mayor Cognetti and my Scranton cousins to send my regrets for missing out our event today. Keeping busy." In the White House briefing room this afternoon, Dr. Ashish Jha, White House COVID-19 response coordinator, with an update.
As Corinne mentioned, I spoke to the president earlier. I also spoke at length with Dr. O'Connor, who is the president's personal physician. And I'm happy to share the readout of these conversations with you, and then I'm happy to take questions. In terms of my conversation with the president, he sounded great. I asked him, Mr. President, how are you feeling? He said, I'm feeling fine. He said he was feeling fine. He had been working all morning. He hadn't even been able to finish his breakfast because he had just been busy. I encouraged him to finish his breakfast. In terms of my conversation with Dr. O'Connor, we talked at length about what happened this morning. As Corinne mentioned, the president got his regular testing that he does on his regular cadence. After he tested positive, he reported the symptoms that have been described. Dr. O'Connor examined him thoroughly. He found his exam to be normal, to be at his baseline. And then obviously he recommended that the president take Paxlovid. The president accepted that recommendation and has started Paxlovid and has taken his first course already. I want to also just take a minute to sort of mark this moment. Because the president is fully vaccinated, double boosted, his risk of serious illness is dramatically lower. He's also getting treated with a very powerful antiviral, and that further reduces his risk of serious illness. And it's a reminder of the reason that we all work so hard to make sure that every American has the same level of protection that the president has, that every American has the same level of immunity, and why we have worked so hard to make sure that people have access to life-saving treatments like Paxlovid. These are incredibly important things for the president to have. They're incredibly important things for every American to have. And we have worked very hard over the last 18 months to make sure we have plenty of vaccines, that we have plenty of therapies, that people can get tested on a regular basis, as the president does, because testing allows you to identify an infection early and get started with treatment early. And we all know from medicine that early treatment is always better. Let me also take a moment to talk about BA.5. If you've listened to me at all in the last couple of weeks, you heard me talk a lot about this subvariant of Omicron that is now 70–80% of all infections in the United States. It's a reminder to everyone, if you are over 50, the way I am, the way many of you might be, if you are over the age of 50 and if you've not gotten a vaccine shot in the year 2022, you need to go get one. You need to go get one now, because it will dramatically improve your level of protection, reduce your risk of having serious illness. It's the best thing that people can be doing.
Dr. Ashish Jha is the White House COVID-19 response coordinator, opening up today's briefing with reporters in the White House briefing room. As he mentioned, joining him, the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre. And one of the questions that she answered from a reporter was about where the president might have contracted coronavirus. The reporter's pointing out the president has, in the past couple of weeks, been doing events around the country in the middle of crowds, shaking hands, hugging people, and often with no mask.
Where exactly was the president infected?
Where was he infected? I don't think we know. I certainly don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
Look, I don't think that matters, right? I think what matters is we prepared for this moment. I think what matters is what Dr. Jha just laid out. If we look at where we were a year and a half ago, this is a president, when he walked in, one of his first priorities was to make sure we had a comprehensive plan to get people vaccinated. And so now today, look to today, more and more people are getting closer to having a more normal life. Vaccines are available, and as Dr. Jha said, if you have not gotten vaccinated, please do. If you have not, if you have not gotten boosted, please do. These are treatments that are going to keep you safe, and I think that's what matters here, is making sure that we continue to do the work. And the good thing is that the president again has been vaccinated and double boosted.
The White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, with reporters in the White House briefing room. Part of her initial written statement this morning includes this: per standard protocol for any positive case at the White House medical unit will inform all close contacts of the president during the day-to-day, including any members of Congress and any members of the press who interacted with the president during yesterday's travel. First Lady Jill Biden was in Detroit, Michigan for an event dealing with education when she got the news.
My husband tested positive for COVID. I talked to him just a few minutes ago. He's doing fine. He's feeling good. I tested negative this morning. I am going to keep my schedule. I am, according to CDC guidelines, I am keeping masks. And so I'd like to go in and see the program here. Learning loss as an educator means a lot to me. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for coming over to town.
Thank you.
How are you doing? You must be terribly concerned.
Fine. Thank you.
First Lady Jill Biden in Detroit. Vice President Kamala Harris was in Charlotte, North Carolina today, and she said this before a speech dealing with high-speed internet access.
Before I begin, I do want to speak about our incredible President, Joe Biden. This morning, he and I spoke by phone. He is in good spirits. He is feeling well. He is doing well. He is fully vaccinated and twice boosted. And, of course, he is. And as everyone who would encourage, who is eligible, would do the same. And he is working from the White House residence. And when we spoke, he was very pleased, as I said, that we were all here together today, talking about the work our administration is doing, on behalf of parents and working families and all who deserve to be seen and heard. So with that, it is good to be with everyone today.
Vice President Kamala Harris in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is Washington Today. From Associated Press, the House January 6th committee is headed back to prime time for its 8th hearing, potentially the final time this summer that lawmakers will lay out evidence about the U.S. Capitol insurrection and President Donald Trump's efforts to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Thursday's hearing is expected to focus on what Trump was doing in the White House as the violence unfolded on January 6, 2021. Congressman Adam Kinzinger, an Illinois Republican who is one of two members leading the hearing, said he expects it will, quote, open people's eyes in a big way. That from Associated Press. Hearing begins at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll have live coverage on C-SPAN radio and television. Congressman Kinzinger tweeting ahead of the hearing video clips of some of the witnesses who gave closed-door depositions to the committee, all former Trump White House officials. And Kissinger has this caption, "What was he doing while the Capitol was under siege? See for yourself, Donald Trump is a disgrace to America." Here's the video.
Was the president in that private dining room the whole time that the attack on the Capitol was going on? Or did he ever go, to, again, only to your knowledge, to the Oval Office, to the White House Situation Room, anywhere else?
To the best of my recollection, he was always in the dining room.
Yeah, what did they say, Mr. Meadows or the president? And all, during that brief encounter that you were in the dining room? What do you recall?
I think they were, everyone was watching the TV.
Do you know whether he was watching TV in the dining room when you talked to him on January 6th? It's my understanding he was watching television.
When you were in the dining room in these discussions, was the violence at the Capitol visible on the screen on the television?
Yes, right.
Clips of witness depositions to the January 6th committee tweeted by committee member Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Working backwards, you heard Pat Cipollone, former White House counsel. Before that, Molly Michael, former executive assistant to the president. And before that, General Keith Kellogg, former Vice President Pence's national security advisor. And the first voice was Kayleigh McEnany, former White House press secretary. This morning, Republican Congressman John Rose of Tennessee also previewed tonight's hearing.
Tonight will be the last scheduled meeting of the partisan committee on January 6th. As my neighbors in Middle Tennessee struggle with the skyrocketing cost of living, I can't help but think Congress's time and energy should be focused on the issues on most Americans' minds, not another political witch hunt. If the committee had any legitimacy, it would allow Leader McCarthy to seat the Republicans of his choosing. Speaker Pelosi made the unprecedented decision to not do so. If it had any legitimacy, the committee would be investigating what caused the events to unfold that day, what led to the breach of security, and what can we do to learn from these failures to prepare for the future. Unfortunately, I don't think the committee has done its job to ask these important questions. Tennesseans are smart and see this process as what it is, a partisan witch hunt in the form of a sham investigation.
Congressman John Rose, Republican from Tennessee, on the House floor. Amy Gardner, national reporter who covers voting for the Washington Post, has been following the January 6th committee investigation, joining us now by phone to talk about tonight's hearing. Thank you so much. The focus of the hearing, we're told, is what former President Trump was doing and not doing during the attack on the Capitol. What do we know about what evidence and testimony will be presented?
Well, a couple of things that we've found out so far as we lead up to this hearing include the fact that Sarah Matthews, a former deputy press secretary, and Matthew Pottinger, a former deputy national security advisor, will be testifying live this evening in the hearing. And we understand from our reporting that both of them primarily will be there to explain why they resigned after the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th happened. In addition, Ms. Matthews is expected to describe what she saw in the West Wing that day. She was not, directly privy to the president's behavior that day, but she, our understanding from our reporting was able to see the comings and goings of those who did have that access. And we are told that it will sort of corroborate the sort of portrait that we have of his day, his inaction, the fact that he was in the dining room watching the television for pretty much the entirety of the violence, not going into the Oval and, directing staff and federal resources to put an end to the violence, but simply watching it unfold on television. I think that's the one of the most dramatic takeaways that we're likely to see tonight, is that he sat there and watched, and despite all of the efforts by those around him to get him to intervene, he did not. And the committee members will tell us, we're told, that the takeaway of that series of facts is that he wanted the violence, he wanted it to continue, and he wanted the election result to be overturned. And it was only when the law enforcement agencies were starting to retain or regain control of the Capitol at 4:17, a little bit after 4 p.m. that day, it was only then that he agreed to speak to the nation and ask people to go home.
You also report that there will be outtakes from the president's video address the day after. What will they show?
We don't know exactly how much they're going to show. Our reporting suggests that there's a certain amount of trepidation about showing too much of that video footage for fear that it will look like they're sort of trying to make him look not just bad. I mean, I don't think there's any trepidation about making him look culpable for what happened that day. But apparently some of the outtakes are sort of veer toward comical in terms of his unwillingness and seeming inability to say the words that his staff had scripted for him. Eventually, he did release a 3-minute video, but it took an hour to produce. We don't know for sure that there's a full hour of outtakes, but we know there are outtakes in which he expresses unwillingness to say that the election is over, unwillingness to say that those who committed crimes in the Capitol will be held accountable. He apparently at one point, we were told, says something along the lines of, I want to call them patriots. But eventually, as you can see from the 3-minute video that he did release from the White House that day, he does say the things that his staff was imploring him to say, although the committee will also make the point that by that time, the president had already been informed that members of his own cabinet were discussing invoking the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. So one individual familiar with the committee's work told us it's the equivalent of a hostage video. It's a CYA video. He was in trouble. He knew it. He was willing to say what he needed to say in order to mitigate any legal liability he might face.
We're talking with Amy Gardner from the Washington Post. This is going to be the last scheduled hearing. What happens to the January 6th committee investigation? What happens going forward?
We know that this is not the last hearing. We've been told that by multiple sources familiar with the committee's work. And I can tell you a little bit about what we think will be coming in the coming months. We think that they're going to continue for a number of months. They expect to continue robustly investigating the United States Secret Service texts that apparently were deleted from Secret Service equipment, texts that were sent that day. I think many Americans have seen the headlines today that a criminal investigation has been opened into that, and I don't know what the basis of that criminal investigation is, but certainly one thing that's been discussed is that there was a violation of the Federal Records Act. And so we know that that is going to be front and center with the committee for much of August. We also know that there are other hearings likely. One topic that we were told is a likely topic for a future hearing is the fundraising and profiteering that happened off of January 6th, and whether there's any fraud in the pitches for money that were made by multiple entities, including President Trump's own committee, based on January 6th, the violence and the aftermath and the run-up to it as well. So this is not going away just yet.
Amy Gardner is a reporter for the Washington Post covering voting. You can follow her work at WashingtonPost.com and on Twitter at Amy E. Gardner. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, tonight's hearing beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern, live on C-SPAN Radio and C-SPAN Television, anywhere on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app. Listen on your smart speaker, say play C-SPAN Radio. Politico has a story that former Trump White House advisor Steve Bannon passed up his chance Thursday to call witnesses or take the stand himself in his contempt of Congress trial, clearing the way for the jury to begin deliberating in the case by Friday morning. Bannon is facing charges over failure to comply with a subpoena from the House January 6th Select Committee. This is Washington Today. The U.S. House, reports NBC News, voted 228 to 195, largely along party lines Thursday, to pass legislation to codify the right to contraception nationwide, seeking to protect it from potential Supreme Court intervention. The Right to Contraception Act, sponsored by Congresswoman Kathy Manning, Democrat from North Carolina, would establish a right in federal law for individuals to obtain and use contraceptives, would also affirm a right for healthcare providers to provide contraceptives and allow the Justice Department and entities harmed by contraception restrictions to seek enforcement of the right in court. The article goes on that Democratic leaders said they were spurred to act by Justice Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion in the ruling overturning Roe v. Wade, who wrote that the Supreme Court should also revisit decisions like 1965 Griswold v. Connecticut, which prohibited states from banning contraceptives and, quote, correct the error it made. That from NBC News. Here's some of the House floor debate before the vote, starting with that sponsor, Kathy Manning.
I rise in support of my bill, the Right to Contraception Act. It seems unbelievable that in the year 2022, we should have to explain that access to birth control is about equality. It is critically important so that women can decide whether and when to have a family, pursue an education, build an economically secure future, and protect their health. Let's be honest about the facts. Almost all women will use birth control at some point in their lives, and more than 96% of voters support access to birth control. Yet the right to birth control is under attack by Republican lawmakers who are pushing disinformation about how contraceptives work and attempting to ban methods like IUDs and Plan B. Justice Thomas has added fuel to that fire by stating in Dobbs that the court should reconsider the constitutional right to contraception. This extremism is about one thing: control of women. We will not let this happen. We will not play defense anymore. This time, we're playing offense. My bill creates a federal statutory right for individuals to use birth control and for healthcare professionals to provide it. It protects a full range of contraceptive methods, including birth control, pills, IUD, and emergency contraceptives. It subjects any state or government official who restricts access to contraceptive services to a civil action by the Attorney General or an individual or healthcare provider whose rights are violated. Let's be clear. This bill is about allowing women the freedom to choose the contraception that works best for them, to allow them to prevent unintended pregnancies. American women, indeed all Americans, deserve the freedom to make their own decisions about their bodies, their family planning, and their lives. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote yes on this well-crafted bill, the Right to Contraception Act, because women and girls across this country are watching you, and they want to know, are you willing to stand up for them? Are you willing to fight for them? I certainly am.
Congresswoman Kathy Manning, Democrat from North Carolina, on the House floor. Speaking in opposition to the bill, Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, Republican from Arizona.
I am here today with my Republican colleagues to stand up for the health and safety of women and girls across our nation. It's unfortunate that this bill is written in such a way that it's unclear that it just covers traditional contraceptives. It is disappointing to see that my colleagues across the aisle are continuing to push their extreme abortion on demand agenda. It is unclear why those who call themselves the Party of Women insist on prioritizing the billion-dollar far-left abortion lobby over women and girls. This legislation, the Payouts for Planned Parenthood Act, permits the widespread use of chemical abortion pills. The FDA deems these drugs as high risk because they can cause excessive bleeding, intense pain, infections, and even death. To make matters even worse, this bill allows abortion providers to administer non-FDA-approved drugs and devices to women and girls without any regard for the drug's efficacy or the safety of the patient. We should not be promoting the widespread and unsupervised use of high-risk or unapproved drugs that could endanger women and girls' lives and almost certainly will end the lives of their babies. This legislation also erodes decades of bipartisan agreement that taxpayer dollars should not be used to fund abortions. Instead, the Payouts for Planned Parenthood Act forces states to direct more federal funding to Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers. This legislation is not about protecting access to contraception, and it is not about protecting the rights of women and girls. It is about one thing, and one thing only: lining the pockets of Planned Parenthood and the rest of the abortion lobby, and I yield back.
Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, Republican from Arizona. The House went on to pass this bill. Again, the vote was 228 to 195. Voting yes, all 220 Democrats plus 8 Republicans: Cheney, Fitzpatrick, Gonzalez of Ohio, Katko, Kissinger, Mace, Salazar, and Upton. And 2 Republicans voted present: Bob Gibbs of Ohio and Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania. This bill now goes to the Senate, where it joins other bills that have been passed by the House in the past week or so to codify the right to abortion and also protect the right to same-sex marriage. It's all stemming from the Supreme Court's overturning of the Roe v. Wade abortion decision. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio just got easier. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern, important congressional hearings and other public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, catch Washington Today for a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. A story from Politico. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, filed cloture on the bill aimed at boosting the U.S. semiconductor industry on Wednesday night. What's not in the bill? The sweeping overhaul of U.S. policy toward China that some lawmakers hoped for. Filing cloture is a way to limit debate and move towards final passage. We'll talk with a reporter about it all in just a moment, but here's Senator Schumer speaking on the Senate floor this morning.
Last night, Madam President, I filed cloture on a major piece of legislation that will help lower costs, boost scientific innovation, and take direct aim at the national chip shortage, which is hurting almost every single American. Members of both sides know that America's chips crisis is sending shockwaves across the economy. It's endangering our national security. According to an article by Bloomberg, China's top chips maker has now likely advanced its tech by 2 generations, threatening U.S. competitiveness. To ignore the chips crisis means higher costs, squandered job opportunities, greater dependence on foreign chip producers. Thankfully, the Senate is close to finally taking action. In the long run, our bipartisan chips bill will ease semiconductor supply chain woes, increase domestic inventory of chips, and thus help lower costs on all sorts of products that rely on chips to work. But because the vote earlier this week was so bipartisan, I amended the bill to include one of the largest science packages that the Senate has considered in a long time.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. Laura Weiss is a tax and economic policy reporter at CQ Roll Call, has been covering the Senate debate on what is being called the CHIPS Plus bill. Joining us now on the phone. Thank you for being with us. What is the CHIPS part and what is the plus?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So this has evolved a lot in the last days and couple of weeks. Right now, it's about $54 billion in grants over 5 years for growing U.S. semiconductor production, funds for manufacturing, funds for R&D, and then there's also funds for 5G wireless deployment. You've got a tax credit that covers 25% of semiconductor company spending on new manufacturing plants and equipment. CBO estimated that would cost $24 billion about. And then you have some science provisions as well, things like funding authorizations for the National Science Foundation. And all of that really has come together over the last couple of days as senators went from, a way bigger package that was sort of bogged down in bicameral conference negotiations to something that was just really focused on boosting U.S. chip production to having a little bit more in there, especially in some of the science provisions.
On the test vote on this bill this week, 33 Republican senators voted no. Also, independent Bernie Sanders, who caucuses with the Democrats. Why have they opposed it?
Yeah, so there's concerns about, this kind of spending right now. Bernie Sanders specifically has argued it's a handout to corporations without enough guardrails. He's wanted a lot more controls on this funding and has sort of railed against a lot of this for a long time. Over in the House, Republicans there also have some concerns about specifically the tax credit that's in this bill. They don't like picking just the semiconductor industry. They want to see stuff that's a lot broader for R&D in the U.S. So there are those complaints with this bill, but it does broadly have bipartisan support and certainly seems like it's got the support to pass, especially in the Senate next week.
You mentioned that it started out as a much bigger bill and it got bogged down. Why did they decide to sort of cut it into just a little piece and move forward?
Yeah, so this has been, a months and months long process. The Senate passed its initial bill over a year ago now. And so there's been this effort to move this forward. Finally, they were in formal conference negotiations for weeks now, but there were some disagreements, including on things like trade. And, you had that kind of got a bit stuck. And so now they ended up pulling out a smaller version, again, really focused on this CHIPS funding. You had Biden administration officials coming to tell lawmakers they wanted December to August recess. There was some concern that, these chip companies are going to make some of their long-term economic decisions. Building plants is a big investment and that they might choose to do it in China or other foreign countries if they're not sure it's economically beneficial to do it in the U.S. thanks to these subsidies.
Laura Weiss covers tax and economic policy for CQ Roll Call. Find her stories at rollcall.com, and on Twitter she's at Laura E. Weiss 16. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is promising to bring up the Senate-passed version of this bill as soon as it clears and get it all done before the August recess. Speaker Pelosi also answering a question today about the bill that gives over $50 billion to U.S. companies that make computer chips. And her husband, Paul Pelosi, according to public disclosure reports, recently buying between $1 million and $5 million worth of stock in a computer chip company. Here's the question and the answer at Speaker Pelosi's weekly briefing.
Over the course of your career, has your husband ever made a stock purchase or sale based on information he's received from you?
What are you saying?
Over the course of your career, has your husband ever made a stock purchase or sale based on information he's received from you?
No, absolutely not. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's spokesperson, Drew Hamill, putting out a statement earlier this week when the story was first reported, saying the Speaker does not own any stocks. As you can see from the required disclosures with which the Speaker fully cooperates, these transactions are marked SP for spouse. The Speaker has no prior knowledge or subsequent involvement in any transactions. On Wall Street today, the Dow was up 162, NASDAQ up 161, S&P up 39. Federal Reserve will be meeting next week and is expected to raise short-term interest rates yet again, another half or even 3/4 of a percentage point. The goal is to fight inflation. That raising the interest rates also increases interest rates on credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, and other things that consumers use. Associated Press reporting that rising mortgage rates have combined with already high home prices to discourage would-be buyers. Mortgage applications have declined sharply. Sales of previously occupied homes have fallen for 5 straight months during what is generally the busiest time of year in real estate. On Capitol Hill today, a hearing about high cost of housing, Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. The chair, Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, asking one of the witnesses, Lawrence Yun from the National Association of Realtors, about the effects of high interest rates, not only on mortgages, but also rents.
We know the Fed's raised interest rates 3 times so far this year. They may do it again, people expect. Discuss what rising interest rates meant for homeowners in terms of their monthly cost, and then if you can estimate how many people do you estimate this might push out of the homeownership market, and what effect does it have on the rental market?
So you combine the impact of the higher prices along with higher mortgage rate currently prevailing versus what it was just 1 year ago, or even December of last year. We estimate that monthly mortgage payment on a typical home in America has risen by close to 50%, 48%. Just consider, something and what people find very dear, trying to purchase a home, it has risen by 48% in our estimation from the changes in prices and mortgage rates.
That's the monthly payment goes up that.
Monthly payment for new set of buyers. Now for existing homeowners who locked in, of course, their monthly
not the
payment
price house, but the monthly payment.
Yes.
Okay, got it. So what effects that have on the rental market then?
So naturally, we are seeing the home buying demand soften, which means that people who thought they had a chance to buy a home essentially being locked out, they have to renew their lease, and now we are seeing rental demand rising, which now is leading to rent acceleration. The official government data is showing rent rising about 5%, but many private sector information is saying rents are rising even faster than that. So right now we are in a very low vacancy rates for apartments, and consequently the rents rising, a heavy burden for renters.
Lawrence Yun is with the National Association of Realtors, Senior Research Vice President and Chief Economist, questioned by Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, Chair of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. You can find the full hearing on rising housing costs before this committee archived at our website at cspan.org. The acting head of the Federal Aviation Administration, Bill Nolan, saying in a Reuters interview that U.S. Airlines travel performance was improving after delays and cancellations snarled traffic and prompted anger from lawmakers and passengers. He said, "We're keeping our eye on things. We've seen good improvements. We can see overall delays are down. The airlines are working to right-size their network." The leader of the Transportation Security Administration, David Pekoski, also citing progress. He had a confirmation hearing today before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. He's been nominated to a second 5-year term. Here's a question from Senator John Ossoff, Democrat from Georgia.
As the public returns to air travel after the worst periods thus far of the COVID-19 pandemic, airline passengers have been frustrated by cancellations and long lines at airports in Georgia and across the country. Over the past year, many airports have faced delays due to staffing capacity issues at TSA security checkpoints. How is TSA proactively addressing workforce shortages through expanded recruitment and employee retention efforts?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the support of the team at ATL. Very much appreciated. We are seeing rapid recovery of travel to the point of about 90% of where we are overall pre-pandemic. So 3 years ago, we're about 90% of those levels. Our staff is not where it needs to be, but in general, across our system, every single day at 430 airports in the country, we are meeting our wait time standards, and those standards are for a non-pre-check passenger to get through screening within 30 minutes, and for a pre-check passenger within 10. And we consistently across the system meet those standards with rare exception. I mean, when you consider 430 airports and roughly 2,400 screening lanes, I'll have a report, maybe 3 or 4 reports a day where we might have exceeded those standards. Having said that, we do need more staff than what we have today, and we expect the recovery to continue into the fall and into the December holidays. We've done some great work in providing incentives to keep, well, first you got to keep the great employees we currently have, and so we provided more incentives to keep current employees in TSA. Secondly, and we just did this at Atlanta, we do focused recruiting events. So we had 700 people that showed up for the recruiting event that we held at Atlanta. And what we do there is we do all of the steps in our recruitment process all at one time. So you do your computer-based testing, you do your, you begin your medical process, and you start to fill out your security forms. This greatly streamlines our ability to bring people on board. The other thing that is critically important, sir, and I appreciate your support of this, is we do have a proposal in the budget from the President's budget for 23 to provide pay equity for TSA. And as you may know, our frontline screening workforce receives 30% less pay than if they worked in any other federal agency. If you went through the standard process of classifying their positions and then providing their compensation for that, we're about 30% off. That has a significant impact on our ability to recruit people and to retain folks. And so I think that's one of the most important things. It's my most important thing as the agency head to provide responses to questions that members of Congress such as yourself might have, and then hopefully, if it's approved and appropriated, to implement.
TSA Administrator David Pekoski, questioned by Senator John Ossoff, Democrat from Georgia, at today's Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee confirmation hearing. Several Republican senators on the committee asked about immigration, specifically what documents are being accepted as identification for those not in the U.S. legally. Here is Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri.
How many individuals have presented TSA with arrest warrants or deportation notices and were permitted to travel in this calendar year?
Under 1,000, sir.
How does this policy comport with 18 U.S.C. 1325, which criminalizes improper entry into the United States by an alien?
Sir, these individuals that have these arrest warrants, those arrest warrants were issued by the Border Patrol or a customs officer, and they serve as a beginning to our identity verification process. So you can't walk up to a checkpoint, waive that form, and then you go right through into screening. We go through a process to verify that you are the person that you claim to be, and that you are receiving the level of screening, which always includes enhanced screening when people don't have the proper identification.
So if somebody who presents an arrest warrant is subject to an in-person interview with the airport's federal security director?
They have an interview with the officers that are on scene at the checkpoint, but that's not all that's happening. What those officers are doing are they're talking to...
When you say the officers on scene at the checkpoint, what are we talking about?
The transportation security officers, the uniformed officers at the checkpoint.
Okay, but not the federal security director.
They will bring in the federal security director if needed.
Well, why would that person not be needed if you have someone who's an illegal immigrant?
Right. So we aren't looking at whether a person is legal or illegal in the country. Our function is to make sure that...
Why not?
Because our role is to make sure that people that might pose a risk to transportation that's significant enough to either require enhanced screening or to not allow them to fly, that the proper...
So your position is someone who is known to have violated the laws of the United States does not thereby need enhanced screening? You're not concerned about this person as a security threat?
Sir, there are people every day that violate the laws of the United States that fly. We look for things that are related to transportation security.
And you don't think someone who is by definition, somebody who presents a warrant for arrest, you don't think that necessitates enhanced screening?
They get enhanced. All of those individuals get enhanced screening.
You just told me that it doesn't necessarily involve any interview with the federal security director, and you also said that you may well let them get on airplanes. And in fact, you've allowed at least 1,000 people to get on airplanes this year, calendar year alone.
Right, but enhanced screening and getting on an airplane are two very different things.
The head of the Transportation Security Administration, Administrator David Pekoski, questioned by Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, at today's Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee hearing. It was a confirmation hearing. Pekoski has been nominated for a second 5-year term. It's also the second confirmation hearing he's had. Last week, it was before the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. We covered that as well. You can find it at our website, cspan.org. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, asked today about what President Biden said yesterday about the reports that she'll be taking an official trip to Taiwan during Congress's August recess. We'll hear from the speaker in a moment. Here is President Biden on Wednesday at the Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, saying that the U.S. military doesn't think this trip is a good idea.
Mr. President, do you think it's a good idea for Speaker Pelosi to travel to Taiwan this summer?
Well, I think that the military thinks it's not a good idea right now, but I don't know what the status of it is.
That's President Biden with reporters on Wednesday. On Capitol Hill today, a question to Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Madam Speaker, the President said yesterday the U.S. military does not think it's a good idea for you to visit Taiwan. You visited Ukraine, obviously. That was important to show U.S. support. Would such a concern on the part of the U.S. military deter you from going
I don't
to
ever
Taiwan?
discuss my travel plans. It's a security issue. You never even hear me say if I'm going to London, because it is a security issue. And so I won't be discussing that now.
What is the most important thing that we can do to deter China?
That is a very major issue. And it is, if we want to have a discussion about that, I think that it's important for us to show support for Taiwan. I also think that none of us has ever said we're for independence when it comes to Taiwan. That's up to Taiwan to decide. But if the inference to draw from your comment is that my going there is problematic, I think what the president was saying is maybe the military was afraid our plane would get shot down or something like that by the Chinese. I don't know exactly. I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. You're telling me, and I've heard it anecdotally, but I haven't heard it from the president.
The House Speaker Nancy Pelosi with reporters today. The Financial Times first reporting that Speaker Pelosi will be heading to Taiwan in August. Taiwan, a self-governing island that China still claims is part of China. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokespeople responding to the Financial Times report, this according to Reuters, if the United States insists on having its own way, China will take strong measures in response to defend national sovereignty and territorial integrity. All possible consequences that arise from this will completely be borne by the U.S. side. Also, this from thehill.com. Pelosi's visit, if it materializes, would mark the first time a House Speaker has visited Taiwan since 1997, when then-Speaker Newt Gingrich, Republican from Georgia, made the trip. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get Washington's top stories sent to you every day. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.